He thought that lighting it by dropping de Barcelona, assuming that everyone would understand the Boris, but the sentence appeared to attach the flowers to the Boris instead of to the avenues. Flowers of the Boris. He also considered writing the avenues of Boris full of flowers, but this left it uncertain whether the flowers belonged to the Boris or the avenues, and it tormented him. It was true that some evenings he seemed to be even more tired than Ryu. Yes, he was exhausted by his study and entirely absorbed him, but he continued nonetheless to do his calculations and statistics that the health teams needed. Patiently, every evening, he sorted out the card index, translated it into diagrams, and slowly enveloped his presence and the situation that precise the way that possible. He would often go and join Ryu on one of the hospitals, and he would ask for the table in some sort of office ward. And settled down there with his papers exactly as though he was sitting at a table at the Hotel de Villa, and in the thick of what smelled like disinfectant and the disease itself would shake his papers to dry the ink on them. At such times he would try honestly not to think of his slender horsewoman and do what had to be done. Yes, if the band really do have to offer themselves molds and examples whom they call heroes, and if they really had to do one of his story, the narrator would like to offer the insignificance of the self-allocating hero who had nothing to recommend him but the little goodness in his heart and apparently ridiculous ideas, and who would be given the truth its due and give the sum of 2 and 2 would in its total 4. Give the heroism in the secondary place that it deserves after, but not before, and generous demands of happiness. It would also define the nature of this chronicle, which is to that the accountable made for the good feelings, which to say that they neither visible nor the design to norm the emotion of the unpleasant manner of the stage play. This, at least, is the opinion of Dr. Ryu, when he read in the newspapers or heard at the radio applaud the encouragement that the outside world had not gone the sick in town. And at the same time as the air by air or by road, every evening the airwaves or the press pitying the admiring comments ranted down from the solitary town. And every time the doctor was irritated by the epic notes in the tone of the prize-giving address. Of course he knew the concerns were genuine, but it was only expressed itself in the conventional language in which men try to explain the unities of the rest of humanity. Such language could not be applied in little daily efforts of Grand, for example, could not describe Grand's significance in the midst of the plague. Sometimes at midnight the greatest silence in deserted town just as he got into bed would catch an all too short moment of sleep. The doctor switched on his radio, and from the distant parts of the world, across thousands of miles unknown by the fertile voices, tired awkwardly to express the solidarity, and did indeed express it, while at the same time exhibiting the dreadful powerfulness of all men who truly endeavored to share the pain and could not see. Aran, Aran, in vain it appeals across the sea in the vain Ryu stood by, waiting then soon eloquence would well up and make still plainer and fundamental deviations that made Grand and the speaker strangers to one another. Aran, yes, Aran, but no. Through the doctor, two loved or two to die, together there was nothing else to be done. They were too far away. What precisely remains to be told before we come the height of the plague, while the pestilence was gathering all its strength for an assault on the town, so that could be hold of it for good, and the long desperate mannerism effort, and the few individuals like Grimbert made the rediscover happiness, the preserve the plague, and the part of themselves that defined against all assaults. This was their way to resetting the threat of slavery, and even though the resistance was inevitable, did not effective as others, the narrator's opinion is to be that its own logic, and that it's fully fruitful in the consideration, but also bore the witness to the elements of pride in which us at the time Robert struggled to prevent the plague from taking him. When it had proved to him that he could not leave the town in legal means, he decided that he told Rayu that he tried other sorts. The journalist started with the waiters, and the waiters of the cafe always knows everything that is going on. But the first one he questioned especially well informed about the very serious penalties imposed upon the kind of venues. And one case, he was even mistaken for the ancient profector, and not only he met Kotar at Ryu's, but he met some headway. That day, Ryu had been taking one of it against the journalist's fruitless efforts and authorities. A few days later, Kotar met Rambert on the street and greeted him with the discreetness that nowadays characterized all his behaviors and others. Still nothing, he said. No, nothing. You can't count on officials. They're not trained to understand. That's true, but I'm looking for another way. It's hard. Ah, said Kotar, I see. He did know a certain channel to explain to Rambert, who expressed the astonishment at this, and he had for a long time been frequenting the cafes of Iran. And he had friends, and he knew about the existence of occasional in which took this kind of operation. The truth was that Kotar had expectors nowadays exceed his income, and he evolved in smuggling rations goods and trade in cigarettes and cheap spirits, and prices in which were constantly going up. The business brought him a small fortune. Are you sure? Rambert asked. Yes, since the position was made to me. Why didn't you take advantage of it? Don't be so suspicious, Kotar said, good-naturedly. I didn't take advantage of it because I don't myself want to leave. I have my reasons. And after a pause he added, why don't you ask for those reasons are? I assume, said Rambert, but that's none of my business. In a sense, no, it isn't. But in another, well, in any case, the one thing is clear of that. I feel much better here since I've had the plague. The other man listened to him speaking. How does one join this organization? Oh, it's not easy, said Kotar. Come with me. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The town was slowly cooking beneath the leaden sky, and all the shops and the blinds were down, and the roads were empty. Kotar and Rambert took to the streets with arcade, and they walked along this some time without saying anything. It was one of those times when the plague became invisible. The silence, the death of colors, the movements could belong to the summer as much as the pestilence. One could not tell if the air was heavy or merse, or if the dust and scorching heat. You had to look and think yourself back to the plague, which was now betrayed the presence of the negative sign. Kotar, who had some affinity with it, pointed out to Rambert, for example, that there were no dogs around. Normally there would have been laying on their sides panting just inside doorways in search of some unattentive coolness. It took to the Boulevard des Palais, crossed the parade grounds, and went down towards the air of the port. And left there was a green-painted cafe, shaded by the slanted awaited many of the coarse yellow cloth. They went in, and Kotar and Robert wiped their foreheads, sat down in the forwarding garden chairs in front of the green cast-iron tables. And the room was entirely empty. Files buzzed in the air, and the yellow cages stunting with rickety quarters of parrots, and the slumped on its perch, and all the feathers drooping. Old pictures showed the battle scenes hung on the walls, covered in the dirt and the thick fulminants of cobwebs. Blind birds dropping were dry, and the metal tablets, including one in front of Rambert. He was unable to explain quite why they came here until the little commotion in the dark corner, and the splendid crocodile hopped out. Just as the heat seemed to increase even farther, Kotar took off his jacket and banged it on the table. A small man swamped in the long blue apron came out in front of the back room, greeted Kotar as soon as he saw him, walked over, kicking the cockeriel aside sharply, and asked, amid the clunking of the fowl, if he could get these gentlemen. Kotar wanted white wine, and he asked for a certain Gracia, and the midget said that he had not seen him in the cafe for a few days. Do you think he'll come this evening? Push, said the man. I'm not his minder. I don't know his usual time. Yes, but it's very important. It's just I have a friend to introduce to him. The waiter wiped his damp palms and on the front of his apron. Ah, is Monsieur in business too? Yes, said Kotar. The little man sniffed. Well then, come back this evening. I'll send a kid for him. As they went out, Rambert asked what the business was. Contraband, of course. They'll get the merchandise through the town gates and sell it at high prices. Fine, said Rambert. And they are the conclusion with the police? You bet. That evening, awaiting the rise of the parrot and the squawking in the cages and the metal tables and surrounded by men in shirt sleeves, one of them with a straw hat pushed back on his head and the white shirts open, chest colored in burnt earth, they got up and Kotar came in and had regular tan features, small black eyes, white teeth, and 2 or 3 rings on his fingers. He appeared to age around 30. Hi, he said. We're drinking at the bar. They drank 3 rounds in silence, and Gracia said, why don't we go outside? And that he walked down towards the Porta Gracia, asked what they wanted of him. Kotar said that he didn't precisely want to introduce him to Rambert for business. It's just that he called an exit. Gracia walked in straight ahead, smoking. He asked a question using he to refer to Rambert, and through the unawareness of his presence. What does he want to do? He has a wife in France. Ah. And then after a pause, what job does he do? Journalist. That's a profession where they talk a lot. Rambert said nothing. He's a friend, said Kotar. They went on in silence. They had reached the docks, access in which was barred by the large iron fence. But they walked over to a little canteen where the fresh sardines were sold, and the smell in which the wafting towards them. In any case, Gracia said in conclusion, I'm not the one who deals with that. That's Raoul. I'll have to find him. It won't be easy. Ah, said Kotar. Is he hiding? Gracia did not answer. Near the canteen, he stopped and turned to Rambert at first time. The day after tomorrow, at 11, on the corner of the customs office barrack on the top of town. He made as though to leave, and turned towards the 2 men. There'll be expressants, he said. And the simple statement, in fact. Of course, Rambert agreed. Shortly afterwards, the journalist thanked Kotar. Oh no, the other man said cheerfully. It's a pleasure to be of service. And of course you're a journalist, so you'll pay back to me some day or another. After next, Rambert and Kotar were climbing up a wide, up-shaded street, and led to the upper part of town, part of the customs office barracks, and had been transformed into an infirmary, and for the first of the large doors people were stationed, having to come home for making visits which could not be permitted, or seeking news from one hour to the next, would be often overtaken by events. In any case, this gathering gave the opportunity for many comings and goings, and one might assume the consideration of unconnected with the matter of the Gracia and Rambert meeting had been arranged. It's odd, Kotar said, this determination to leave. When it comes down to it, what's happening is very interesting. It's not for me, said Rambert. Of course, there's a risk. But after all, before the plague there was just as much risk crossing a busy road junction. The moment Ryu's car stopped beside them, Teru was driving, and Ryu seemed to be half asleep. He woke himself up to do the introductions. We know one another, said Teru. We live in the same hotel. He offered to drive Rambert into town. No, we've got a render wrist here. Ryu looked at Rambert. Yes, Rambert said. Oh, said Guitar in astonishment. Does the doctor know? He comes, the examining magistrate, True said, looking at Kotar. The latter's face fell, and Mr. Othone was indeed coming down the street towards them in a brisk but even step. He raised his hat as he passed the little group. Good day, Monsieur de la Jug, said True, and the magistrate returned the greeting from the occupants of the car and looked at Kotar and Rambert, who stayed in the background, nodding gravely at them. True introduced Kotar and Rambert, and the magistrate looked at the sky the very second inside, remarking that there were indeed sad times. They tell me, Monsieur True, that you are engaged in applying the preventive measures. I cannot applaud you enough. The doctor, do you think that the disease will spread? Ryu said that he could only hope that it would not, and that the magistrate replied, one must always hope. Designs of the providence and unknowable. True asked if the evening had brought him any excessive workload. On the contrary, we have all common laws case the decline. Now all I have to examine was the serious breaches of the new regulations. Never have people shown such respect for the old laws. This is because, by comparison, they seem good, inevitably, True said. The magistrate abandoned the reflective air and assumed, with a gaze apparently surrounded by the mid-air. Now he examined True coldly. What does that matter, he said. What counts is not the law, but the sentence imposed, and nothing about it. That man, Kotar said, was the magistrate left, is the enemy number one. The car started, and shortly afterwards Rambert and Kotar saw Garcia coming, and walked down towards him without a sign of recognition, and said, instead of greeting, we must wait. Around them crowded the majority of whom were women, and staring to complete silence. Almost all of them were carrying baskets in the vain hope that they could come across the sick relatives, with still more foolish notion that the relatives could make use of the provisions. The doors were gradually more armed sentries, and for the first time an odd cry of them heard across the yard, which the separation barracks from the door, and the moment of worried faces among them, one was turned towards the infirmary. 3 men were watching the scene in a hello curt, and the deep behind them made them turn around despite the heat. Rael was smartly dressed, tall and strong. He was wearing dark check suits and felt hat and turned up at the brim. His face was rather pale, tight-lipped, and brown eyes. Rael spoke rapidly and precisely. We'll go down into town, he said. Garcia, you can leave us. Garcia lit a cigarette and let them walk away. They did so quickly, adjusting their steps to keep up with Raoul, who was now placed himself between them. Garcia explained to me, he said. It can be done. In any case, it will cost you 10,000 francs. Rambert replied that he accepted. Have lunch with me tomorrow in a Spanish restaurant in the harbor. Rambert said that he understood, and Raoul shook his hand, smiling for the first time. After he had gone, Kotar made his apologies. He was not free the following day. In any case, Rambert no longer needed him. When the following day the journalist entered the Spanish restaurant, all heads turned as he went past. The shady cellar situation below the level of the little sun-dried yellow street, only frequented by men mostly Spanish appearance, and all soon Raoul, who was tabled in the back of the room, had made sign to Rambert, the journalist, who started to walk over to him. All curiosity vanished from the faces, which turned back to their plates. At the table where Raoul had a tall fellow, thin and badly shaven, the extravagant broad shoulders and horsey face and thinning hair. Long slender arms covered his black hair emerged from the rolled-up shirt sleeves. He nodded 3 times as Rambert was introduced to him. His name had not been spoken, and Raoul only referred to him as our friend. Our friend thinks he might be able to help you. He's going to... Raoul stopped because the waitress was coming over to take Rambert's order. He's going to put you in touch with 2 of our friends who will introduce you to some sentries who are in our pay, and won't be the end of it. The sentries have decided themselves that the right moment, the easiest thing would be for you to stay for a few nights with one of them who lives near the gates. But before, our friends must give you the necessary contractions. When everything is arranged, you will be set up in the free with him.